Good evening and welcome to the People's Platform. They say feminism is too aggressive, but patriarchy has built entire empires on the backs of women and called it tradition. Centuries of unpaid labor, silenced voices, and sacrificed dreams were called tradition. Even today, we are experiencing universally the unfair division and invisible burden of unpaid domestic labor on women. Across cultures and classes, women are disproportionately having to shoulder the burden and responsibility of caregiving, housework, and emotional labor, tasks that keep households and societies function, yet remain undervalued and unrecognized in economic or policy terms. Tonight, we attempt to decipher how we can reframe care work, not as a personal sacrifice, but as a shared social responsibility, and how this shift can be reflected in our policies, our practices, and attitudes. I'm so pleased to be joined by Dr. Sepali Kottegoda, one of the founders and director programs of Women and Media Collective. Good evening and welcome to the show, Dr. Kottegoda.
Thank you.
There is a South Asian proverb, raising a daughter is like watering the neighbor's garden. Across South Asia, especially in rural settings, we see how women, their autonomy, their decisions, their bodies, their identity is sort of cast aside. We see this culturally, and we see this for most part in religious texts, and we see this societally. And although the landscape might be shifting in certain respects, it remains deeply problematic. So we are used to seeing a perpetually exhausted woman. We're used to glamorizing a superwoman who can do her job and raise children and be a great wife and look after the in-laws and her parents and keep the house really tidy. Speak to us about how problematic these norms are and the normalization of these.
Thank you, Sonali. I think you framed it very well, because in South Asia, in Sri Lanka, Sri Lanka stands out as a country which is very unique because we have had a welfare state which has provided us with free education, more or less universal. In the times of the ethnic conflict, of course, it was not, there were uneven distribution or access. We have free health care, which to all intents and purposes it does still function. We have had, I think, a lot of more recently, a lot of challenges to ensure free quality health care, but we do have it. So, and then there is no explicit discrimination between girls and boys, because both girls and boys go to school. We don't have female infanticide, right? So there are lots of plus points that we can give to Sri Lanka. But in this area of work that is done in the home, which is the terminology is unpaid care work, we are still, I think, looking into the extent of this issue. Now, one of the main reasons we can posit this when we look at the Sri Lanka labor force, and where we find we have 22 million persons in Sri Lanka, 10 plus for males and 11 plus females. But then when we look at the labor force, we find that 70% or so thereabout of males over the age of 16 and 30 to 31% of women over the age of 16 are deemed to be in the labor force. So there's a big issue here. Why aren't women there? And when we look at the types of policies that have been adopted or implemented or formulated by governments over the last decade and a half, there has been a lot of push to get women into the labor force. Now, the reason why we want to see why women are not in the labor force is that they are designated as engaged in housework. That is the census definition. So as long as these women are engaged in households, which is a large proportion of women who are not in, that is out of that 70% of women who are not in the labor force, about 55% are engaged in housework. So that is unpaid care. So that is one major factor why women are not in the labor force. So then what is this unpaid care work? It's exactly as you said. Somebody puts a kettle to boil in for tea, somebody makes sure the food is cooked, somebody washes clothes, sweeps the house, looks after the children, looks after the elderly, looks after any person with disabilities, a family member, and therefore the household functions, and as you said, actually the economy functions. So what we looked at actually what this unpaid care work is, and the amount of hours that women spend in unpaid care work and men, because some men do some of this unpaid care work in their homes. So this is not to say that unpaid care work is only done by women, but there are men who also do some of the work. And I believe, as you said, maybe the scenario is changing somewhat. I always say maybe the younger generation, there will be more sharing of work that is done in the home for the welfare of the family.
Sure.
So but the expectation is that women will do this work. And if we look at the way girl children are brought up and boy children are brought up, we are told, we will be given dolls or whatever it is, that cooking sets, and the boys will be given guns and toys, but also boys will be, there's more likelihood of boys being allowed to go ride bicycles and climb trees. Again, this might be shifting, but I think overwhelmingly it is still the same. That shift. So what is it that we are expected to do as women, or as girls and women? We have to be responsible for housework, and there is an assumption also that all women will know how to cook. I think we can, we should maybe look at that a little bit more carefully. All women will know how to cook, and all men do not need to know how to cook. That's how our social norms
so cooking is gendered.
Absolutely gendered. And when there are boys who want to learn to cook, or men who want to cook, while they are men, and if they are married, it will be appreciated, but quite often boys are not encouraged, because or sometimes men are not encouraged either, because women will say when he comes to the kitchen is a mess. So I want to say, if somebody doesn't know how to cook and you go into cook, of course. So if you don't teach them how to cook from from a young age, So, but the gendering is very stark, and the gendering is such that while a large proportion of adult women are full-time housewives, there are those who are also in paid work. But when they go out to work, paid work, and I want to say, I want to use this word work in terms of unpaid and paid. When women go for paid work, either in the house or outside, they still have to ensure that all those activities that lead to the well-being of that household, all those activities are completed. So I think that is a major issue, not only in the opportunities that women have to develop on their own capacities, which are beyond that of housekeeping, and also I think it's very detrimental to boys and men who are not expected to, and not considered to be capable of doing this kind of work. So I think it's a very detrimental way of looking at men as well.
And the weaponized incompetence where we hear women sometimes say, oh, my husband doesn't know how to cook, so I have to go home and make him his tea and then make him his dinner and then do the children's homework, like help them with their homework, because my husband doesn't really know. The husband is nicely seated watching TV. We know about these tropes, which are problematic, although we have to preface this by saying that there are absolutely men who do believe in division of labor between men and women, who carry the burden of the family, all of those responsibilities. However, we're talking about how it is problematic societally, this issue. Dr. Kottegoda, let's also talk about the emotional burden that women have to disproportionately carry. Remember, doctor's appointments for the children, for the parents, the in-laws, all of these tasks, planning anniversary parties, planning the children's birthday parties, taking the cake to school, attending parents-teacher meetings, all of these add up as a part of the emotional burden that they have to disproportionately carry.
Yes, and I think it's, if you look at going to see parent-teachers meetings, now if the teachers, the schools, the whole system expects that the mother will be the person who attends parent-teachers meetings, so the onus is on the mother, if she is in paid work, to make sure that she takes leave. If she is working in unpaid care work at home, she has to arrange the whole schedule so that she gets to school. And so one has to ask the question, if we are talking about parenting, why is it that the system expects mothers to come for children? When fathers do go, it's a different, it's like, why has the father come? Where is the mother? And why didn't the mother come? So that onus is really, the women have to bear that. And irrespective of whether they are full-time in paid work or not, and irrespective of whether they are full-time unpaid care work or not. And I think it's very true that most of this planning and ensuring, so well-being of the family is not confined to the cooking and cleaning. The well-being of the family, it also includes the other aspects, make sure that everybody has gone, whoever has a doctor's appointment has gone, whoever has to, it might be in the rural areas, there are other expectations that women have to comply with because they're women. So I think that kind of social norms are really integral to the way in which we are looking at the responsibilities and the contribution of men and women, not only to society but also to the economy. So because we don't consider unpaid care work or the work that is done in the home with no remuneration for the well-being of the family, we don't give it any value. And that's the reason why when we look at the labor force, so many women are not in the labor force, because the work that is done in the home is not considered to contribute to the overall economy, nor even to the household economy, because it's not, she's not walking into the house carrying a wad of money, but she's been up from 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock and getting all the doing all these work to make sure that those who have to go, who can go to paid work, do so, the children who have to go to school can do so, but none of that is recognized as adding value. And I think that's a very serious issue. It's a deeply socio-culturally, it depends on socio-cultural norms, but this is the 21st century and we are looking to recognize the contribution of women and men, not only to the larger economy in terms of how the economy is labor is defined, but also bringing the labor of in the household to recognize its economic value.
Dr. Kottegoda, when I was researching for this interview, you mentioned a concept called the social reproduction theory. So basically, if a worker produces a commodity, then who produces the worker is the question that this social reproduction theory asks. If a worker goes to work from 8:30 a.m. to 5 p.m., this theory asks what happens before 8:30 a.m. and what happens after 5 p.m. Dr. Kottegoda, help us understand this theory in motion, if you will.
So, okay, so if we take the example of a person who's going out for paid work,
right,
that person, before the person leaves, there are, in every single household, irrespective of class or where we are living, which sector, which region or district, somebody makes the food before those who go out to work, to paid work, do so. And that might even be the person who's going out to work, because if it's a woman, she will be expected to. But it has to be done. When the person comes back, as you said, that person has to prepare for the tea, for dinner, then washing up, clearing up, and then preparing for the next day's meal or whatever work that the person brings home from, like preparation for next day's paid work. Now, yes, so that work is done, and we are not even asking how it's done. We are just assuming. So, actual social reproduction is talks about looking at unpaid care work and undervalued domestic work, where we take in the domestic workers, for example. And if we look at domestic workers' wages, in Sri Lanka there is no minimum wage for domestic workers. So somebody who's getting paid in Siembalandua or Mulathiu or Colombo 2, Colombo 7, Batiklo, Kandy, they will have different pay, daily wages, and today there are mostly daily wages for domestic workers, because live-in domestic workers is now less. Now that's undervalued. But then there's no value given to the work that is done in the home. So social reproductive theories brings it out that an economy functions with this contribution of work that is remunerated, that is regarded as helping the economy grow, but the economy functions also with the work that is done in the home, which is not remunerated, and for all intents and purposes is thought of as it's the duty of somebody in that household. So that somebody, if you look at all our households, you will realize it's the mother or the wife or a grandmother, or it might be a mother-in-law, but it's the women who are expected to and who consider it most of the time as their duty to make sure that everybody is looked after.
Yeah.
So that work, unfortunately, is not recognized as economic value. Each work is recognized as work that anyway women do. Right. This is I remember a discussion on migrant workers, domestic migrant, overseas migrant work. I mean, we send out so many, and then one man said, "Why should we be talking about this amount of money for their wages? It's work that women do anyway." So we do have that cultural norm also, bearing down on women, saying it's work that women do anyway, and if a woman does not do that work or is considered to have not done it well enough, that woman might be reprimanded. But there is very little discussion on, well, maybe we should be making sure that we share this work at the household level. And I also remember a discussion that we had with a group of representatives of women's organization from different districts, and one of them said, when a woman who is employed elsewhere comes back home and does housework, another family members, maybe it's her husband, maybe it's a son or a daughter, will come and help, because that woman has been working the whole day. So when she comes home, they might come in to help with the cooking or cleaning or whatever. But if it's a full-time housewife, that is the woman who's not getting remunerated, they don't come to help because she has been doing nothing at home. The issue is you do nothing. Women, that's, and I ask thing, working very hard to do nothing. That's what women do. That's how our gender norms are. So that's the reason why, I think unpaid care work and the work that women put into care has to be given far more value and recognition. And there is, I think, more of a conducive environment at the moment to bring up unpaid care work. I mean, the now Prime Minister's first speech in Parliament was on unpaid care work. So there is, I think, a more maybe a few more openings for us to raise this issue. This is not a case of just talking about trying to change the family dynamics, because we are now saying the work that is done in the home need not be done by one person, or the burden of responsibility need not be on one person, because it's definitely responsibility that can be shared.
We are in conversation with Dr. Sepali Kottegoda. We're going for a short commercial break. We'll be right back.
Far from the city noise, under a mango tree, children turn broken desks into a stage. They sing, they dance, they try. No bright lights, no big crowds, just a small school and big dreams. Change is coming. An open-air stage for the Kottegoda Primary School. Gametta, for the people, by the people.
Across the nation, talents and dreams are ready to shine. Introducing new faces and extraordinary performances from every corner. We proudly present some of the finest rising stars.
Duffy Crown Season 2!
June 7th onwards, every Saturday and Sunday at 8:30 p.m. only on Shakti TV.
Welcome back. We are in conversation with Dr. Sepali Kottegoda, Director Programs of the Women and Media Collective. Dr. Kottegoda, you do a lot of work at village level on creating awareness around the issue of unpaid care work in particular, and the lack of recognition, the lack of value that it gets. I'd like to ask you about the realistic conversations that you have at village level with stakeholders, including the men who are a key stakeholder in this discourse. Speak to us about some of these interactions, because these are not conversations that can be had at conferences at the UN. It can't be had in Colombo. Do you get a lot of pushback? Are you viewed as one of those Colombo feminists who are trying to teach us how to live our lives with our families?
I mean, we work with organizations from different districts. So when we have been working on recognizing the terminologies, recognizing, reducing and redistributing unpaid care work, these conversations are with different constituencies in the different districts. So sometimes when I have been speaking with men, usually there is some discomfort when you talk about, or you raise the issue of the work that is done in the home from 4 in the morning till maybe 9-10 in the night by women to take care of the families. The discomfort is usually in two ways. With women, they feel, but it's because that's what we do. And so we have to really have a deeper conversation about what is expected of us, and how do you actually feel about being recognized for the work that you do, and the value of the work that you do with women. With the men, it's the other side, which is my wife treats me with a cup of tea in the morning, and then she makes it because she does it out of affection. And then I have had men who say, particularly when I'm raising the issue of the actual computing, giving economic value to this work, sometimes men have challenged me and said, you are expecting us to pay our wives for this work. So then I clarify, we are not talking about payment. We are talking about recognizing its value. And also in this, if we were to ask someone else to do this same work, we will pay that person, albeit low wages, because as I said earlier, domestic workers in this country, there's no minimum wage, and overwhelmingly the wages are very low. It is not commensurate with the number of hours that they work or the work that they do, and they are not protected by any of the work that is workers in the formal sector, which is, they belong to the informal sector as well. But we will pay somebody. So this is not a case of saying, you have to pay your wives to do the work, though I'm sure there will be women who will be quite happy to have payment for the kind of work that sometimes might be pure drudgery, but you just do it every day. So, and then there are women who are not sure how to bring the conversation because you have to speak with other members of the household if you want to say that the work that is being done for your welfare needs to be first recognized as work, because there's labor in it, and then it needs to be shared, because just one person does not need, it's like saying, does your clothes need to walk to the washing machine or walk to the well, and then do the clothes walk by themselves to the clothes line? No, somebody does it. Rice doesn't just get on the pot, somebody does it. So recognize that, and then understand how valuable it is, and not only to say, which we are quite fond of saying, "Gedara budung amma," and then on the other side, how about the number of domestic violence cases that are coming up that are now being recognized as a violation of rights? I mean, the domestic violence legislation, the prevention of domestic violence legislation, which the Women and Media Collective was very initiated much of those discussions, was in 2005, I think. But it taken a long time.
Yeah.
But we are getting more cases of reports of domestic violence, and quite often they are things like the food was not good enough, or the tea was not made on time. Now this is, you have to relate this, because the work that is done in the home, the unpaid care work, is assumed so much to be what women do anyway. Women must do, it's their duty to do, and I have the right to punish the woman if I feel it is not done properly. So take up the something that was cooked was not tasty, or the man's clothes were not washed, or any reason, because women are considered to be doing nothing, nikang inni gedara. So I think, it's very much related. And I think the conversation about recognizing and valuing work, unpaid care work, must be at a much broader level. And Sonali, I think even in Colombo, I think the conversations on recognizing unpaid care work, there may be quite troubled responses from men even in Colombo.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, definitely when I go to other parts of the country, yes, I'm a Colombo feminist, and you have to carry that baggage with you, but you also know that why you are there and what's the work that you're doing, and I'm not, you don't go there as an solitary individual, but you're working on social issues, so there's always space for conversation. And I think it's very important that we, in these conversations, we also take up the challenges, because we are seen to be questioning a very comfortable socio-cultural normative behavior that makes sure that the family is looked after and the household functions.
At the expense of women.
Yes. Now, at the expense of women, we'll have to add.
That's
at the
right.
end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Until quite recently, even domestic violence or abuse within the family was almost expected. It was normalized. Women who were getting beaten up and raped by their husbands were keeping their mouths shut because they wanted to maintain that facade of having a happy family. It is only now with the new legislation, increased awareness and advocacy work that is being done, that women are now realizing a man can't hit me even if he is my husband and is supposed to be my protector. It is only now that this realization is coming, but little by little. When it comes to unpaid care work and the stark contrast in division of labor between men and women, when systems are so entrenched, when we as women are told to emulate the self-sacrificial love of Yasodhara, how do we, Dr. Sepali, go about meaningfully questioning the status quo in order to ensure that women can rest, women can just be?
I think, well, one thing is to, I think, have conversations about that status quo and what it implies and what it means, and how keeping up the status quo means for women and men. I think we can start by saying, how does this, for example, when visitors come, when particularly relatives visit, the woman in the household is expected to treat them well and to make sure there's enough food. Now, if she fails, then it's a blight on that, the husband's, for them. Now, it is a very simple, thing for them to divide up this work, for man to make tea and and serve it. Now for men to serve tea in household is very very unusual. Well, that's the word I would be carefully here to use, that if men come with a this is the man of the house and he's still serving tea, overwhelmingly people will ask questions as to why your wife is sick, or why your wife can't do, or ask the wife, you're getting the husband to do this work. What is this work that you're getting your husband to do? And what is the work, for example, if it's a new child is born, the father is generally expected not to get involved with washing babies, bathing babies, or carrying. No, that's the mother's job. But why isn't the father being brought in as well? Because unless we have these kinds of changes, this notion of this happy family, everybody wants to have a happy family. So the question is, what is a happy family, and who wants a happy family? It doesn't, I'm not sure whether these families are asking to be labeled as happy families, but I think there are others who want to show that Sri Lanka is full of happy families. But actually, I mean, you really have to ask, what is a happy family? And we do push the question, what is a family? Is it mother, father, son and daughter? Or is it single mothers? Or is it same-sex parents? What are we talking about? And then the happy side. I mean, with as we were talking earlier, with the domestic violence, prevention of domestic violence legislation, there has been an increase in the number of women reporting violence in the home. And there are organizations as well as the Ministry of Women's Affairs that has a hotline that are coming forward to give more kind of systematic responses to persons who are in need or want to escape domestic violence. And I think when Women and Media Collective was working in the early 2000s on domestic violence, trying to see how to push legislation for prevention, we recognize that women are not saying, put my jail my husband because he's beating. Women were saying, venas mata gahanne natta, or if he doesn't drink, it's only because he has alcohol that he does this. If he doesn't have alcohol, he won't. So so when one can ask question, is somebody forcing your husband to the tabaruma and pouring alcohol down his throat, or is he going and getting the alcohol? Then they say he's going and getting the alcohol. So then they are getting drunk, and the one person they can beat up thoroughly and most comfortably is their wife. They are not beating everybody down the road. They come home. So but still, if you can, and that's why the legislation is there, and that's why counseling and other support services must be strong and be available and accessible to victims or to survivors of domestic violence, and where possible to the perpetrators. But I think we have to be very critical of this concept of a happy family. And I mean, people in families are happy sometimes. People in families are happy more than sometimes, but it's not a universal kind of changing kind of mantra that everybody must be living in a happy family. And also family structures are changing.
Absolutely.
So we are not even extended families are becoming less, more nuclear families are coming up, which is why we can look to the future and hope that the younger generation nuclear families will be more prone to looking into how they share responsibilities, and maybe with luck never engage in domestic violence.
Absolutely. Dr. Kottegoda, let's also talk about how persons with disability, elderly care, how these also factor in to unpaid care work?
Yeah, I think it's really important to recognize unpaid care work. I think we can highlight this in relation to looking after the elderly and in relation to looking after persons with disabilities. Now, when we say the elderly, Sri Lanka has a very fast growing aging population. So in another 5 or 10 years, at least 25% of our population is going to be over 60. And that over 60 population, the majority are going to be women. Okay, so we need to trace back. This is how we have to actually so who's looking after the elderly now? It's women in the family. Most often it's the women in the family. There may be men as well. And then when we see the demographic chart and we find that those who are elderly or over 60 or over 70, the majority are going to be women, and women live longer than men. That's also another demographic feature in Sri Lanka. So then we need to see, we have to make very clear and constructive interventions in the field of in the arena of unpaid care. We have to, which means the state has to prepare for addressing the issue of the care of the elderly. Now, if we look at it today, the care of the elderly and the care of disabled persons, the majority of care is given by women. And in the case of persons with disabilities, while Sri Lanka has various regulations relating to the care of persons with disabilities. There is an act, there are government funded homes, care homes. There is very little, if any, focus on the persons who are caring for that disabled family member in the home. And in our work, we did a pilot study on unpaid care work and persons with disabilities. We find it's very, actually these women are quite often, they are isolated, because society at one level looks at a woman with a disabled child in good South Asian socio-cultural framing. It is her karume that she got a child like this, and quite often she's left to fend for that child by herself. So there may be another child who's not disabled, or two children, but there's usually the father of that disabled child has left. So it's a woman who's looking after this child or children. And if there is another child who is not disabled, then that child might be taking over some of the care. So this woman is with this child. She has to take the child to it may be an adolescent, it may be an adult, has to take the person for medical treatment. So sometimes they come, because Colombo has the best treatment centers for different types of disabilities. So they have to come from outstation. And we did come across one family where both the husband and wife, they had two other children who were not disabled, but both husband and wife were looking after the disabled child. But that was just the one household. In almost every other household, it was the woman who was stuck. Now we have to look at, when we talk about care and unpaid care, this mother has to do all the work plus looking after this person, the disabled individual, medical care. Then what kind of support do they have? We don't have, for example, when in relation to pregnancy and childbirth, mothers, it's very widespread, public health midwives. The health service has this wide network of public health midwives who go and check up on pregnant women, and then they check up on the newborn, for a period of time. And I think it's really important that we have a cadre from the health service, health sector. It could government sector definitely, but it could also be private sector, but really no cost. They should not be charged, these women who are looking after disabled family members, to support these women,
Right.
because many of them are isolated. I mean, depending on, of course, in the neighborhoods that they live in, and even you go into rural areas, the houses are quite isolated, and sometimes relatives come and help, but that responsibility is very, very huge on one individual. Now the government gives an allowance. So the government allowance for the elderly, I think, went up to 5,000 rupees a month, and for the person with disability to 10,000. So we have to come back to that question. Okay, is 10,000 rupees enough for a person with disability, for the medicine or for the food or for whatever else? Is 5,000 rupees enough for a person who is elderly? So who is doing that work then? So while we do, because we have that welfare state, we do have these allowances, I think there is a huge responsibility, particularly from the state, that the state recognizes the unpaid care that goes into the well-being. It can say, we can give you X amount of money for that person, but we recognize that much more work is done by unpaid work is done by your family member.
How must the government now consider all of this? The non-recognition of care work through policy, in order to have meaningful policy outcomes that benefit the women of Sri Lanka as well as the men in an equitable manner.
I think the first issue is the government must publicly recognize unpaid care work as being key to the well-being of families, because it's not just saying there is something called unpaid care work, but the recognition should should include the fact that this unpaid care work is what maintains, is what gives ensures the well-being of families at whatever class, economic class you might be, right? Of course, right. Second is, you can do this, I mean, we can do it in terms of actual policy that can bring in recommendations. We have to also be able to provide financial and social support for the caregivers. We should be able to, just as we give an allowance for elderly and persons with disabilities, we should be able to give some kind of financial support to the caregiver.
Okay.
Right? And in terms of social support, there has to be much more, I think, investment in care facilities. That is, whether it is care homes,
Right.
and we know that there are homes for the elderly, right? Some of them are run by local councils, like child care centers. Some of them are done by and for persons with disabilities, but the budget allocations are so poor, that the quality of service is very poor. So private sector has moved in for the care of elderly, but then the private sector is charging for it's the middle and upper middle class who can afford it.
Right.
But for ordinary people, you need to invest in care, but it doesn't have to be care homes. Sometimes when you're looking at unpaid care, what women might really appreciate is a daycare for the elderly, daycare for persons with disabilities. Depends on both cases, the extent of aging and extent of disability. But we are an aging population,
Right.
we have to move in.
Okay.
So we have to invest in care services that, and I think it's important to recognize that a daycare for elderly and daycare for person with disability gives both parties, the carer, relief in terms of not being burdened by 24-hour care, so she might be able to do some income earning work, or whatever it is she wants to do. And for the person with disability of the elderly, it's also a break. I mean, it's not, these are things that are actually possible, and I think the private sector can really come in here with financial support. And I'm clear here saying not the fees. If it has fees at all, then it has to be a very nominal fee, because we have to recognize that many households will not be able to afford high fees. So those are two things. And I think in terms of education, we don't want to still have our school books which say Amma Uyanawa Tata Patriki. I mean, that's the images that we are still getting. We still have modules that talk about the mother, when the father comes home from paid work, mother greets him with a cup of tea. We have to move out of that. It is what I'm saying, if my wife is getting up and making me a cup of tea because she loves me, I will make the tea for her because I love her. But those conversations are sometimes very flippant, Just it has to be realistically done, and children also need to be told that this is not just for boys, this is not just for girls. You can and you must. And let me tell you, when Women and Media Collective had a children's art exhibition few years ago, and we said it was on unpaid care work. And some art teachers from, Hambantota or wherever used to call and asked us, what is this unpaid care work? And then they sent in these paintings and drawings, wonderful. But overwhelmingly, they showed the mother doing all this work. But they had men who were scraping coconut in the kitchen or breaking cobwebs. But that's how children also see it. So if we want a change, can we have a child drawing where the father is cooking and where a mother is reading the newspaper, or the mother is helping, doing something else, but not near the stove? So cooking can be a collaborative exercise, and we need to know from a very young age that's normal.
Dr. Sepali Kottegoda, thank you for this conversation, and thank you for all the work you do.
Well, thank you for asking me to come and having me here.
Absolutely. Thank you for watching us. We'll see you again next Friday. Good night.